I traveled to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, to attend the Arctic Circle meeting. The organization brought together hundreds of government, business, and community leaders to talk about the future of the Arctic. Mads was one of the speakers at the event. Mads has led the Arctic Economic Council since 2021. Previously, he was a senior advisor for the Confederation for Danish Industry.
The Arctic Economic Council is an independent business membership organization. And we are quite unique because we are the only business organization that has companies as members from across the Arctic, but also non-Arctic states. So we have from all 8 Arctic states, but also from Greece, from France, from Switzerland are members. Our goal is to promote investments in the region and actually try to change the perception of the Arctic, that we are more than just beautiful landscape and polar bears, we are also a place of doing business.
Scientists now say that the Greenland ice sheet is even more sensitive to the warmer climate than previously thought. Research published in the journal Nature Climate Change in 2022 found that current melting rates of the Greenland ice sheet will trigger nearly a foot of global sea level rise in the coming decades.
The Prime Minister of Greenland was in Glasgow for COP26, and he said, kind of mournfully in his speech, I'm from Greenland, and the island is melting. Kind of a clarion call. We've got to do something about climate change. And obviously that's going to be a part of the discussion here. What are your thoughts on that? Are we making any headway at all? Does it keep you up at night? What are your thoughts?
No, it does keep me up at night. Global warming in the Arctic, the UN said it happens 3 times the average speed, the global average. Now, most recent research shows that it happens at 4 times the global average, global warming in the Arctic, and even in some places 7 times the global average. So yes, it is an issue.
That's terrifying what you just said, though.
When the wind is blowing, you can either build dams or you can build wind turbines. You know, like you can just say, okay, we have to use this and we have to benefit from this in some way or another. We have to deal with the issue. The reason for global warming is not because of those of us living in the Arctic. Again, 4 million people, most of it renewable energy. The reason for global warming comes from outside the Arctic region. But what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. So when the glacier melts here, that will impact the low-level cities around the world. So we have to act. But again, I really truly believe that the Arctic has some of the solutions for the green transition. So as I mentioned, raw materials. If you want to drive electric vehicles, if you want to have wind turbines, you need rare earth elements, you need lithium, you need nickel. All of this is in the Arctic region. So yes, it's a major challenge. I mean, especially for the local communities. Fishing stocks is moving to new places. Traditional hunting grounds is disappearing. A lot of the indigenous communities that are reindeer herders in Scandinavia cannot go to the same places they used to go to. So it is a massive challenge, but we can overcome it.
Let me ask you about sustainable development. We do something called the Global Action Initiative each year. We tackle an issue that's facing the globe. One year it was poverty, the next climate change. This year we're talking about sustainable development, and each person has a different definition of it. How would you describe it?
I think sustainable development there's a tendency for people to look at sustainable development just for the climate perspective, but it's a lot more. It's also having jobs to wake up to. It's creating jobs for people. It's making sure that people have healthy living. You look at the sustainable development goals and they cover a lot of fields like the oceans and so on. In the Arctic region, the good thing is that we can export a lot of what we call sustainability. We can export that. The Arctic region has 4 million people. The rest of the globe has, in 2050, 9.7 billion people, and we will just be less people in the Arctic. But what we have in the Arctic is we have fish to feed the world, we have energy to power industries, renewable energy, and then we have raw materials you need in the green transition. So if we talk about sustainability, we need to say, how can we create jobs locally in the Arctic, and how can the Arctic help the rest of the world? So for example, we can catch fish here that are sustainable certified. What does that mean? That means no overfishing. So in Greenland, they're looking at quotas all the time, and they're looking at the scientific recommendations. You have to do responsible mining. That means, for example, use electric vehicles in the mining site. That means creating local jobs. That means cleaning up after yourself. The Arctic is full of renewable energy. That's also sustainable, doing the green transformation.
I was in Hawaii a year ago, and the people there actually love the pandemic. they weren't overrun by tourists. And you have this vision of what this is like now. And then I guess you can also look into the future and see just tourists swarming this area, much like Iceland is experiencing. Talk to me about kind of that, trying to find that equilibrium, that balance.
You're spot on. In Greenland, they want to avoid Iceland. And that's actually the good thing here, is that they can learn from Iceland. So they're learning, and they say we want high-end tourism. We want high-end tourists, we want people that comes with a lot of money, comes in here, they go heli skiing, they go, musk ox hunting, they go and see the glacier and the Northern Light and all of this. But they don't want mass tourism. That said, they also want to balance it with having cruise ships. The challenge with cruise ships is they don't leave that much money in the city, but they are good for promoting the country. So you need to find that balance between having tourism and then also having it sustainable and responsibly. I think the important part here is that Greenland's economy is 95% based on fish for their export. So the majority is always going to be the fishing industry. Tourism is an add-on, the same with mining being an add-on in the industry. So we are not dependent on tourism in Greenland, but we need tourism. We need to diversify, but we don't need to diversify as much as in Iceland, for example.
So let's talk about the scales, because for the longest time, economic development goes up, environmental protections go down. I mean, that's how people have always kind of viewed this equation. How do you hit that balance as well?
I think the most important thing is that you are aware that you need to be sustainable, because that's why people come to the Arctic. People don't come to the Arctic to experience the experience of Paris, Rome, or Washington, or DC. People come here because they want to have the space. But luckily, Greenland is the biggest island in the world, so there's plenty of space. The Arctic is a massive place, so you can have these unique trips and you don't overrun the place. Also in Greenland, as well as other places of the Arctic, they have what is called UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So these are areas that are allocated from UNESCO World Heritage, and they say, you cannot construct anything there, you have to be careful what you do, you have to clean up after yourselves. And this actually helps a lot to avoid this mass tourism.
Warmer temperatures are affecting a crucial part of the Arctic economy, fishing. The retreat of sea ice is making more of the Arctic Ocean accessible to ships, raising concerns of overfishing. In 2017, 9 nations in the European Union reached a deal for a 16-year ban on commercial fishing in the central Arctic Ocean, covering 2.8 million square kilometers of international waters. This would give scientists time to study climate change impacts on the marine ecology here. In the meantime, some Arctic companies are finding ways to make their practices less harmful to the environment.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned fishing, mining, obviously important. When we think about those traditionally, environmentally, are they so friendly? How do you do it so that it's sustainable?
I think fishing is the best example. We're in Greenland now, and there's 3 steps. One is, how do you catch the fish? You have to catch it sustainably. The next is, how do you consume it? And here I mean, how much of the fish do you use? Don't throw away the waste. Iceland is one of the leading countries in the world on using the most of the fish. And then the last part is also, what do you do with how you transport it? So you have to do it sustainably. You have to catch it sustainably, you have to consume it sustainably, and you have to transport it sustainably. Can I just give you one short example of one of my favorite companies in the fishing industry, Kerecis from Iceland. They take the skin of the codfish and they use it for burn wounds. So today, the skin of the cod is worth more money than the fillet of the cod. So that means what you used to throw out, you're today making a high value product from.
The United Nations Sustainable Development is a blueprint for a more sustainable future. Beyond climate change, the UN calls for gender equality, poverty alleviation, job opportunities, and much more. One specific goal is reducing inequalities for indigenous peoples. The entire Arctic is home to around 4 million people, and about 10% are indigenous. But in Greenland, nearly 90% are indigenous Inuit.
You mentioned the indigenous communities. How do you involve them, keep them to where they feel like they've got a piece of the action too?
So in the Arctic Economic Council, we have what is called the Arctic Investment Protocol. And it's a very simple set of guidelines for investors that comes into the region. And there's six principles, and one of them is local involvement. Make sure that in Greenland they always say nothing about us without us. It's about involving people. I think the best example here is a company called Polarctic, which is an Alaskan-based company. It's 2 women, and they use artificial intelligence and machine learning to find out where the new fishing species are outside of Nunavut in Canada. And what they do with the local involvement is they take historic environmental climate data going 50 years back, but they also go and talk with the elders in the communities and says, where were the hunting grounds 100 years ago? Where did you use to go and fish? So they combine this modern technology, modern climate data with traditional knowledge, and then they give the information to the local communities who says, with all this data now, we can predict this is where the fish is going to be tomorrow. So this is how you have to do it. When you go and involve local communities, you have to make sure they also benefit from it. You have to make sure that when people make money here, that the money doesn't disappear completely from the region.
Because there's also the concern, and you see it in other parts of the world, where you get the brain drain, where young people growing up say, I don't want this, I'm going somewhere else. Is that something that also has to be managed, and is that a concern?
I always say there's 3 major challenges in the Arctic region. One is infrastructure. There's an infrastructure gap, a digital divide. 2, there's the investment challenge, getting investments to the country. And the third one is demographic. Demographic is by far the biggest challenge throughout the Arctic region. We have urbanization like anywhere else in the world. People are moving to the cities. We have the younger population are not growing, so we've got a lot of elders that suddenly have to be taken care of with less people. And also we have a lot of opportunities here, but we don't have the skilled labor. So the Arctic region really needs to be open for outsiders to come and work here. If you look around here in Nuuk, if you go to the restaurants, all the service industry here is people from Asia working in the service industry. Royal Greenland, the biggest company in Greenland, they have 10% foreign workforce. You need the foreigners to come here because, the Arctic got plenty of space, but we are too few people.
Melting ice is also opening up new shipping routes, drawing the attention of many countries, including China. China's most recent 5-year plan called for building a polar Silk Road to develop infrastructure, economic partnerships, and research in the Arctic.
Can you talk about China's investment in the Arctic?
China's investment in the Arctic is not as big as everyone talks about. There's a lot of talks about Arctic investment, but I used to work in Africa, and I saw a lot more Chinese investments in Africa than I have seen anywhere else in the Arctic. In Greenland, there was a construction company trying to bid on the airports, and there's been a little bit of Chinese investments, a minority share in the mine in the south, which was Shenki Resources. The Arctic region is open for investments, but I think there is also sometimes misunderstandings of who comes and invests and for what reasons. So that's why you just need to be transparent about investments, and that goes for everyone investing here. But we don't see as much Chinese investments as we would like in the Arctic Economic Council.
You've kind of written about a polar Silk Road. Do you see it kind of burgeoning at some point, or is it going to stay where it's at now, do you think?
I think global warming will open up new sea routes, that's for sure. So where before it would take 45 days going from northern China to Rotterdam, it can now take 35 days if you go on the northern sea route or Russia. Right now, as the situation is right now in the world, that probably is not likely, but in the future, maybe there's a potential there with the melting sea ice. I also think you have to look at let's say, rare earth elements. China sits on 98% of rare earth elements. But there's also rare earth elements mined in Canada, in Greenland, in the US. So I think things will change over time for various reasons.
You mentioned that it's the investment of China is not where a lot of people think it is, which gets into a whole geopolitical dynamic, which there's kind of this tug of war, the US, China, and who's up, who's down, that sort of thing. How much of that is factoring into the dialogue that you're referring to that maybe just kind of noise?
I think it's a big factor, and I think the key here is to be transparent. So when you do an investment or when you show interest, please involve the local communities and always engage in dialogue with them, and that goes from any country. But yes, the Arctic is not a bubble anymore. So if you go back 20 years ago, we were like a snow globe that you would shake and it would just be like a closed little environment. But the Arctic today is really a part of the global village, so to say. So what happens elsewhere in the world also impacts the Arctic.
You mentioned what happens elsewhere in the world. When you look at the Arctic population, a lot of it's in Russia. You don't see a Russian delegation here, obviously, because of the geopolitics and what's happening in Ukraine. Does Russia need to play a role, and is that a concern on your part that they're not here? How do we continue dialogue? Because obviously it's going to take, everyone rowing in the same direction to deal with climate change.
I think, there's international law to follow no matter what, and that goes for anywhere in the world. The Arctic region has some challenges that, as you said, by far the majority of Arctic is Russia. When you look at climate data, for example, a lot of it comes from Russia, if you look at permafrost. So we need to find in the future a balance. I actually think the biggest impact here is on the local communities. So if you take a town like Kirkenes in the high north of Norway, on the border to Russia, most of their business was with Russia. When the war started in Ukraine, they had to close down, and now a lot of jobs are being lost. So we have to look at these border communities. Instead of looking just what happens in the capitals, it has a massive impact. So it has to be solved. I'm not sure how and when. That's not for me, but it definitely has an impact on the region.
I have a friend of mine, a Finnish reporter, who says the same thing. You have Russians who vacation in the border towns in Finland, clearly with them tilting towards NATO. I mean, all of these dynamics are going to play a role moving forward. Do you I said what keeps you up at night. I mean, when you look at kind of the world landscape, is that a concern of yours?
Actually, I think the biggest concern on the long-term horizon, like in business, we don't only plan like 1 month ahead, we plan much longer ahead. And I think it's actually lack of investments. So it's banks staying away from the Arctic because they believe it's like just snow and polar bears. So banks will sometimes stay away from the Arctic. So a lack of investments in the region is a big problem. And then people, how can we attract people to move here? How can we get people to move to Nuuk? How can we get people to move to Greenland to help in the green transition? That's what keeps me up at night. Do we have the right workforce? Because I know we have the solutions here. Like if you want to make hydrogen for the future shipping, future flights, the solution is just right here in Greenland, but we need the people.
How important is an event like this?
It's important. It's important to meet. I think during COVID, all of us got fed up with meeting online, and you don't have the same dynamics. You can go to presentation and lectures, but it's what happens when you drink the coffee or when you walk around the town. That's what really, really matters. And the beauty of Nuuk is that everything is so tiny here. So, you go and knock on the door here and you can talk with the Prime Minister of Greenland. You walk in the hotel room and you sit next to the Premier of Yukon. So that's the beauty of these events. And, it's a long distance to travel here. It's a long travel, so people also make the most of it when they're here.
It's so funny because over here, people can probably hear the noise. There's sessions going on here, but off on the sidelines, that's where a lot of this work gets done, doesn't it? It's these kind of meetings that you just described. It's no longer Zoom meetings. It's actually having coffee with somebody and talking to them. Describe that for me, this world and the importance of both.
So I left breakfast and I walked over here, and in the elevator down, I meet a guy from India. So I start talking with him, and I come down in the lobby and I meet another guy from India. And it took us 3 minutes to walk over here. But now I suddenly have a contact to the Security Council of India, where is the coordinator of Arctic Affairs of India. India is a growing player in the Arctic region. And being able to meet this guy, I would never have met him if I've just browsed the internet and sat in a Zoom meeting. But because I just took the elevator down, I managed to meet with him. And now we're going to link up. And I told him, hey, I'm coming to India. Let's meet with some of your colleagues. And that's the beauty of this, really.
3 minutes matter.
Yeah, 3 minutes matters a lot.
Well, you've given us much more than 3 minutes. Thanks so much. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.